Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today we're going to be looking at an updated Unified Minds list. This time it's going to be a Spelltag Malamar based build. A lot of people are hyped on all sorts of Malamar builds for Worlds, Spelltags being one of them. We also gain a lot of new like Psychic GX attackers from Unified Minds. We get things like the Mewtwo, the Latios, the Tina. We get all sorts of different things. So plenty of exciting avenues for Malamar to be looked at. Today we'll be looking at the predominantly non-GX based build of Tina Mali. Let's talk about the basic concept, and really it's just saying that Malamar's good. We know that Energy Acceleration is always great, and Malamar has rarely been that bad of a deck since its release, and it'll continue to be powerful by the looks of things, especially now because Malamars don't get gusted as often. Sometimes your opponent only has like a couple custom catchers they can play once or twice during the entire game. Usually that's more towards like the late game when they've started to accumulate these pieces. So it's really easy to rinse and repeat Giratina. And that's like the best thing about the deck. You can get more procs of your Distortion Door ability, getting even more damage counters into play. And you can just simply promote your Jirachi, attach return, double recharge, get your Giratina back into the active. So you're constantly putting pressure on the opponent by simply having this one recyclable Giratina the entire time. That strategy is online a lot more often in the game. That also means that Spelltag's even better, with less tool removal, obviously Field Blower rotating, and also less gusting around the Giratina. It means you force people to knock things out in the active that have this Spelltag live, which give you even more damage counters that you can play around with. Set up one-hit KOs in future, put some damage on things like Jirachis in the back, put stuff on things like Dedenne as well, and even like tag teams, you can try and get them into 2-hit KO range and stuff. So that's a really good deal. Spelltag is really, really strong in this format, and Giratina is one of the best users of it in the game. So let's kick into the Pokemon, starting off with that 4-4 Malamar line. We want to have good odds of getting all these out as quickly as possible, because they are still integral for the deck. We'll start off with the new tag team, even though it's just a one-of. I am enjoying Espeon&Deoxys in the list, really just for its cross-division GX attack alone. This card offers a like finishing blow type attack where you put 10 counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. If you do have 3 extra energy, you get to do it with 20 counters. That will very, very rarely happen. But that 10 damage counters, man, that is sometimes so good. When you've been doing these Distortion Doors, when you've been doing spell tags, you can easily just have Espeon&Deoxys as a win condition to take your final 2 prizes on things like Dedenne, and it puts the pressure off custom catchers, which is fantastic, especially when you get hit with Reset Stamp late game. That's one thing that's pretty awkward about this deck. Sometimes when you are 2-hit KOing stuff, your opponent's just going to retreat into something on those last few turns where they force you to have double custom catchers. They're going to hit you with that, Reset Stamp, and make life difficult for you. Now, having the Espeon&Deoxys means that you can be able to access their bench with a big sniping attack, basically, but much more flexible. So it really fits the theme of the deck. When we already have spell tags, we already have Distortion Door, counters are going to be all over your opponent's back line, and a lot of times you can cross division to be your finishing move. So he's a great end game sweep card for us, which is fantastic. Then we have the 2 Giratinas. Distortion Door is, of course, that ability that helps us loop them the entire time. And Shadow Impact is that main attack. For 2 Psychic and a Colorless, you do 130. Really good baseline. You're knocking out most non-GXs at that point, especially with help from Distortion Doors and from spell tags and whatnot, so that's fantastic. You do have to put 4 counters on one of your own Pokemon. Sometimes this can just go on your own Giratina if you're up against things that have a higher damage cap than 130 in the first place. But a lot of the time, you can end up putting this on all sorts of other things, like your Malamars and whatnot. Usually it's not too much of an issue. There are a handful of decks that might be able to take advantage of it, and obviously bear in mind in a mirror, that's pretty sketchy, so make sure you're putting your Tina damage on yourself in Mali mirrors. We have 1 copy of Mimikyu. Filch is a nice sort of bailout attack that you can use sometimes just to draw a couple extra cards, but Copycat is still in format. This is an SM99 promo. Obviously, the Copycat Mimikyu does rotate from like the main set, but this promo keeps it in, so do bear that in mind. This attack is still fantastic. Great against Reshizard, mostly, because you're able to copy Flare Strike and do 230. That's obviously great numbers if you've already been able to do some spell tag math. So if Giratina's been knocked out, spell tag goes 4 counters onto that Reshizard, you can come in and Copycat and it's going to be fantastic for you. Also, just in general, it's a 2-energy attacker, so even if you haven't got all your Malamars rolling and you're sort of scrambling for stuff to do, the Mimikyu can still come in and do good numbers against your opponent, which is great. Going to play one copy of Mew. The bench barrier is, of course, very good against Pikarom. One of our trickier matchups because we can't one-hit KO any of their guys, so oftentimes they can get their big full blitz off, and then they get into Tag Bolt quite easily with things like Tag Switch, so having the Mew to defend against that is pretty nice. Also, it's not the worst starter for us either, obviously just having the 1 retreat cost in the first place, but also Psi Power can once again place more counters, which does synergize with the deck overall. That one Dawn Wings Necrozma GX, this GX attack gets so much better post-rotation, because again, Gust is harder to come by, Moon's Eclipse doing 180, and your opponent can't damage you. That turn is really insane. So this is obviously a big tech card for Blacephalon GX as well. You can knock out a Blown on their B-string turn and become invulnerable. That's also a pretty big deal. So it's in here for a few reasons. Invasion can also help out against paralysis and other status conditions. Then we have the GX attack, which is very good against Blacephalon, as well as like just trying to 2-hit KO some tag team Pokemon and try and buy yourself a free turn. Can be pretty nice. So Dawn Wings is just a very versatile card, and we get a lot of use out of it. One copy of Dedenne. It can be somewhat of a liability at times. Obviously, it's easy prizes for your opponent to take, and that's something you have to be careful of, but it's still a great out to just draw you a handful more cards, especially in those opening turns. And at the same time, it's pretty good for having discard synergy with Tinas or with your Psychic Energy themselves, which can be pretty reasonable. Double Dedenne so that we can Stellar Wish in between those turns where Giratina keeps getting knocked out and whatnot, which is great. And in those opening turns, Stellar Wishing is always a great deal to get us more outs into Ball Search cards and into supporters and whatnot, so Jirachi is still pretty nice in this deck for sure. Onto the trainer cards, one copy of an Adventure Bag. I prefer to playing a third copy of a Skateboard, which is kind of what the other thing, that's kind of where the slot was until I thought about the Adventure Bag, but being able to pull out board and spell tag is pretty nice, and obviously you're Stellar Wishing a lot of the time, so Adventure Bag's just a nice one-off there. Couple switches alongside the couple of Skateboards synergize with the Jirachi quite nicely, as well as moving things like Giratina or a Malamar or whatnot if we really have to. 3 Acro Bikes for some good discard potential as well as digging. 3 Pokecoms. We are playing 17 Pokemon, so we have reasonable odds of this being live. Again, very important for us to hit Inkays on turn 1, Mally's on turn 2 and whatnot, so that's a pretty important card to have. Also giving us outs for things like Dedenne if we have nothing else going on in our hand. For treasure, can search out pretty much everything but the Jirachis and Dedenne. So that's going to be really important. Getting our attackers, getting our discard synergy on the go, getting our Mallies. You know what treasure's all about at this point. For custom catchers, even though we are playing the Espeon&Deoxys, I'm still playing customs. I think they're still important, especially when you're a 2-hit KO deck. It feels like you have to play custom catchers when you're 2-hit KOing stuff, because otherwise your opponent can just retreat around you too easily. The boards, I've already mentioned, good for the Jirachi. You can also find its way onto things like Inkays and stuff in those opening turns. Spell tags, obviously a big part player in the deck for things like Giratina most of the time. And 3 Viridian Forest, giving us, again, discard synergy and giving us access to energy cards. It's really important to attach turn 1 with this deck so that you give yourself less pressure at finding multiple Malamars on turn 2. Just try and make it your goal to find like 1 Mally on turn 2 and then attach for turn on turn 2 as well, and you should have been able to attack with things like Giratina, which is a pretty good deal, so access to Viridian is definitely important. Onto the supporter cards, we're playing 2 copies of Judge. As you may have noticed, I'm not playing any copies of Reset Stamp. I've gone back and forth with Reset Stamp in the deck. You do have Jirachi, so you have reasonable odds of like Stellar Wishing towards it in that late game, but Stamp is just so bad in the opening turns. It really is just terrible, and there's so many times when I'm like, man, I need to hit Malamar this turn, so I'll just like play this Reset Stamp pre-Cynthia to give myself like higher odds of finding like what I need. So many situations I had with Malamar was when you just had to like burn your Reset Stamp for no real reason. So instead, I'm going to play a couple copies of Judge. It gives us a higher supporter count just in case you want to get it into a fresh hand, but also it can provide disruption. So this is like the halfway house option. Pre-Reset Stamp, Judge, and Let Loose were like the only ways that we could hand disrupt. So we're going to go back to the old school and keep these Judges in the list to offer some hand disruption against some certain decks that build big hand sizes and also sort of disrupt their late game. But at the same time, it gives us at least some hand refresh So I think this is the best of both worlds type situation. Judge seems to be performing better than Reset Stamp overall. I'd like to hear your thoughts on Reset Stamp though, because it has never felt that great in Malamar in my books. Then we have the 4 copies of Lillie and the 4 copies of Cynthia to round things out. Lillie's still good on those opening turns where we have so many insta-playable ball search cards, and we have Viridian and stuff. We have good outs to lower our hand size, and Cynthia always going to be a good card for some shuffle draw. And for the energy, just 8 Psychic, pretty simple. I think with the 3 Viridians, that's plenty of outs to start seeing them. 2 manually attached and to get in the bin as well for the Malamar, so that's always a pretty good count. There's the full list if you want to take a pause now and a screenshot or whatever else. It's always in the description as well, as always. Onto the tech options. You can tech this deck further. I have got a good amount of one-offs going on in here, but if you don't believe in the Espeon&Deoxys, if you don't like the Dawn Wings, maybe some of these ones are more for you. The Latios having Tag Purge can be really annoying against some of these Tag Team GX decks. Also, the Gengar Mimikyu giving you some potentially one-hit KO potential with Poltergeist, and also maybe slowing your opponent down with a Horror House GX could be pretty handy. Mew and Mewtwo copying some of these guys could also be a pretty reasonable option. I really want to squeeze in a Ditto into this list. Haven't really found the space for it so far, but just giving yourself that extra out towards having additional Inkays is just pretty handy. Especially when we don't have any Pokemon recovery. It sort of protects you a little bit against things like prizing and them just getting grinched in the opening turns. So I could definitely see you trying to make space for Ditto in here. It's been something that's been, once again, in and out of my list as I've tested it. Then there's the big question mark of supporters. If you don't agree with the 2 Judge and the 4-4, like Lillie, Cynthia, I could definitely see you trying some other stuff. Erica's Hospitality has been in some successful Ultra Malamar lists that we've seen at the NEIC and whatnot. Hapu is a new supporter card, which does have obvious great discard synergy, but it is discarding a lot of cards, and I am a little bit scared about losing some of your one-off Pokemon. That's the main reason why I don't have Hapu in here right now. And Pokemon Fan Club, believe it or not, has been a card that I've tested a lot of in Malamar, and I don't hate it. I generally think it's pretty reasonable. I think I like it just because this deck isn't playing any Cherish Balls, and it's like one of those options where Fan Club can just get you Dedenne plus Inkay, and just guaranteeing 1 Inkay on turn 1, and then getting a fresh 6 cards is just so vital sometimes. Fan Club obviously only good on those opening turns, and is a little bit sketchy to fill your deck with supporters that are so narrow and niche. That's the main reason why it's currently not in the list, but I could definitely see you testing out this, and if it works out for you, hey, that's pretty cool, because I think especially if you go first, the Fan Club is like so good, because you're not really going to get your active knocked out a lot of the time, so you can just be chill going like, okay, I'll just grab 1 Inkay and Dedenne, get that fresh hand going and whatnot. The only real downside of the Fan Club is that you end up committing a bench space to Dedenne like every single game, and if you're putting down Dedenne, you're putting down Jirachi as well. That doesn't give you many like tech spaces. So you're pretty much just left with like the 2 Malamars and Giratina being powered up the entire time. So that's just about it, really. So that's the main reason why Fan Club is kind of like not in the list right now, but definitely a consideration. As is Cherish Ball, even if it's just 1 or 2 sneaky copies. Giving yourself extra outs to Dedenne and extra outs towards your Dawn Wings turn or your Espeon&Deoxys could be pretty nice as well. But right now, they're just not making the cut for my list. Onto the matchup overview. I think the biggest mainstream matchup that you're a little bit afraid of is Pikarom. Yes, we are playing Mew, but they can always gust it up. If they do gust it, then they can still have that 2 or 3 prize turn with Pikarom. And simply because we don't take one-hit KOs, they oftentimes just sit on the board, being allowed to use their tag teams and move between them pretty easily thanks to Zeraora. And they just have too much control over the game against you, which I think is the biggest drawback. We currently don't have any outs for Shedinja. There aren't many ones I would really consider adding into the list. Maybe something like a Rangaroo or something like that. But I really don't think this deck needs to tech for Shedinja so much. Whimsicott's another matchup that I found pretty awkward. Really because we're, once again, 2-hit KO based. And if Whimsicott is undoing that damage half the time, then we're really going to be slow. And that's not really very good for us. Rowlet Eggs is also one of these things where our damage output is just low for the majority of the time. They can just out-heal us, and we'll end up just slowly being ground out by them for the most part. On to my closing thoughts. I think lacking a one-hit KO attacker is sometimes a big issue. I think it's most known when you're up against Pikarom. I found that Pikarom can shred through this deck like a good amount of times, which is a bit worrying. And trying to work in a one-hit KO attacker isn't all that easy, because it's either something like Chomp or Ultra Necrozma. Both of them require a different energy cost, so That's the main benefit of the Psychic Mally. You only need to commit 8 spaces to energies, whereas these other 2 builds of Mally need to commit like 10 spaces to energies. And that eats into your consistency cards and whatnot. But lacking a 1-hit KO is sometimes a little bit awkward and something to bear in mind. And I also feel like just playing Malamar, there are games where you just Lillie, miss your Inkays, and like even if you only have 1 in play, it really is so painful. Malamar was known for having like 10 ball search cards sometimes, even higher, with like 4 Ultra, 4 Treasure, and then X amount of Nest Balls. And it feels like even though we are having Pokecom and Treasure, the comms are never that fantastic because you end up having to put in Malamars for Inkays and then being like, next turn, I really wish I can draw back into Malamars, which is sometimes a little bit awkward. So genuinely, I would try out Fan Club for yourselves, see how it goes. It's something I've tried out and I'm still back and forth whether or not I like them in the list. Sometimes having that peace of mind of just getting those basics down is just so good. But once again, putting Dedenne into play can be a bit of a liability. So some food for thought there. Let me know how you've been trying Malamar. What's your favourite build of Mally as well? This is the first of a handful of Malamar decks that I'll be doing for Unified Minds. I'll hear it all down below in the discussion. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.